The alien fleet hovered above Earth, its massive ships blocking out the sun. From the command ship, Commander Selena Vros watched as the planet below grew closer. Her species, the Valorians, were known for their power and their advanced technology. For centuries, they had dominated planets across the galaxy, but now they had come to Earth for a very different reason. Earth was a small, seemingly weak planet, far from the center of the galaxy. But what the Valorians didn't know was that humanity was not what it appeared to be. And now, the Valorians had come to test their power against humans, confident that they could easily defeat them. Selena turned to the window, staring out at the blue planet below. She knew the mission was risky. The humans had been growing in number, their technology advancing faster than anyone had expected. But they were still nothing compared to the Valorians. Or so she thought. The Valorian fleet was ready. They had brought their finest warriors, men and women who had fought battles across countless worlds. They were fast, strong, and skilled in every kind of combat. If the humans posed any threat at all, these warriors would crush them without breaking a sweat. Captain Lars Griffin stood beside her, looking at the map of Earth. His face was serious. He had led many successful missions in his time, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the unknown, the uncertainty of facing a new enemy. But he didn't show it. He knew his team was the best. "How soon until we land?" Selena asked, her voice cold and steady. "We'll be on the ground in 30 minutes, Lars replied, his tone calm. "We'll follow the plan. Capture a few humans, study them, then destroy their weapons and technology." Selena nodded. "Remember, we need them alive. We need to learn everything we can about them before we destroy them. Do not underestimate them." Lars didn't respond. He knew that warning all too well. The Valorians had underestimated other species before, and it had cost them dearly, but this time he was certain. Humanity was no different from the countless other species they had conquered. They would fall just as easily. As the fleet began its descent, Lars gathered his team. Each member was a specialist in different areas: combat, tactics, and infiltration. Sergeant Rachel Cross, a sharp-minded strategist, was the team's expert in human psychology and behavior. Lieutenant Cody Wells, a young but skilled fighter, was eager for action. Together, they were the perfect team for the job. Rachel, standing at the front of the room, looked at the team with focused eyes. She was always the calmest under pressure, but today she felt a sense of unease. She knew that the humans were unpredictable. They were different from the other species the Valorians had faced. But she kept her thoughts to herself. "Listen up," Rachel said, her voice firm. "We land. We capture. We study. Don't engage unless necessary. And remember, we need them alive. No killing unless we absolutely have to." Lars stepped forward, his tall frame towering over the others. "We're here to gather information. The humans have technology that we need to study. Don't underestimate them, but don't overestimate them either. We'll be in and out before they know what hit them." Cody, who had been staring out the window, turned to face them. His eyes were wide with excitement. "I've heard the stories about Earth," he said. "People say humans are weak, but I've also heard they can be pretty tough when they want to be. Maybe we'll have a little fun after all." Rachel shot him a look, one that clearly said, "Don't get too confident." But Cody didn't seem to notice. He was young, and his eagerness could be both an asset and a liability. The ship finally broke through the atmosphere and began its descent toward the surface. The planet below seemed peaceful: lush forests, vast oceans, and towering cities. But there was something unsettling about it. Something that made Rachel feel uneasy, even though she had been part of many missions like this before. The ship landed in a quiet, remote area. They had chosen to make their landing in a place far from the major cities, hoping to avoid drawing attention. The humans didn't yet know they were here, That would change soon. Lars gave the order to disembark. The team moved quickly and efficiently, their weapons ready. As they stepped out of the ship, the air was thick and humid, a sharp contrast to the cool, controlled environment of the ship. The team adjusted to the change in atmosphere, but they remained focused on their mission. Rachel scanned the area, her sharp eyes looking for any signs of human activity. The terrain was rough, with dense forests and rocky hills. It wasn't the easiest place to land, but it would give them the element of surprise. "Keep your eyes open," she said quietly. "Humans may not have the weapons we do, but they know their land better than anyone. They could be hiding anywhere." Lars nodded, his face hardening. "Let's move out." The team split into groups to cover more ground. Lars and Rachel led the first group, while Cody and two others took a separate route. The plan was simple: find a human settlement, capture a few individuals, and learn everything they could about their technology and culture. It would be a quick and easy mission. Or so they thought. As they made their way through the forest, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The silence was unnerving. On other worlds, there had always been the sound of animals or the hum of technology in the air. But here, there was nothing. It was as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They walked for what seemed like hours, passing through dense trees and rocky paths. The team was starting to grow restless. They had seen no signs of life, no footprints, no buildings, no animals. It was as if they were the first beings to set foot on this land. "Where are they?" Cody asked, his voice tinged with impatience. "I thought humans lived all over this planet." Rachel glanced at him, trying to keep her nerves in check. "They do. We just need to find them." But as the hours passed, the situation only grew stranger. There were no signs of civilization. No humans, no animals, nothing. It didn't make sense. The planet was too vast and fertile to be completely empty. Then, just as Rachel was about to suggest turning back, they heard it. A low rumble in the distance. It wasn't thunder. It was something else, something different. The team froze, listening closely. The rumble grew louder, and then, suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the trees. A massive figure appeared from behind the trees, charging toward them. Before anyone could react, the figure attacked. The figure that appeared from the trees was unlike anything the Valorians had expected. It was tall and powerful, moving with a speed and grace that no one could have predicted. The team had just enough time to react before the figure launched itself at them. "Get ready!" Lars shouted, raising his weapon as the figure charged. But the human didn't stop. With incredible strength, it slammed into one of the Valorians, knocking him to the ground. The alien warrior struggled, trying to get up, but the human was fast and strong. The Valorian couldn't believe it. The strength of the human was far greater than they had imagined. The human raised a large, jagged blade above his head, ready to strike. Lars fired his weapon, hitting the human in the shoulder. But the human barely flinched. Instead, he turned to face Lars, his eyes filled with fury. Rachel was quick to act. She threw a small device at the human, and a net shot out, wrapping around him tightly. For a moment, the human struggled, but the net held firm. "Take him down," Rachel ordered. The Valorians quickly surrounded the human, but he fought back with everything he had. He was a blur of motion, swinging his blade and using his body like a weapon. It was like nothing the Valorians had faced before. Lars moved in, trying to disable the human, but the human spun around, throwing one of the Valorians into a nearby tree with a single, powerful kick. The team had underestimated him. This human was a fighter, and they had never expected such strength. Finally, after a long struggle, they managed to pin the human to the ground. He was breathing heavily, covered in sweat, but he glared at them with defiance in his eyes. Rachel looked down at him, feeling a strange respect for his will to fight. This was not a weak species. "Who are you?" Rachel asked, kneeling next to the human. Her voice was cold, but there was a hint of curiosity in it. The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he spat in her direction, his eyes full of hatred. "Human," Lars said, his voice steady. "We have come in peace, but if you continue to resist, we will not hesitate to destroy you." The human just smirked. "Peace?" he muttered, his voice rough and full of anger. "I've heard that one before. Peace doesn't come from conquerors. It comes from the people you try to crush." Rachel narrowed her eyes, trying to understand. They had been expecting a weak, frightened species, but this human was nothing like that. He was proud and strong, and he had fought with the kind of determination that only a desperate creature could have. "Let him up," Rachel said, motioning to the others. "We need answers, not blood." Lars hesitated for a moment, but then gave the order. The Valorians stepped back, allowing the human to rise to his feet, though they kept their weapons ready. The human was clearly exhausted, but he stood tall, refusing to show weakness. "Why do you resist?" Rachel asked, her voice softer now. She was trying to understand the human's actions. "We have no reason to harm you if you cooperate." The human's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand. You come to our world, thinking you can just take what you want. But we fight to protect what's ours, our land, our people. We don't just roll over because someone thinks they're stronger." Lars exchanged a glance with Rachel. This wasn't what they had expected. The humans weren't running away, they weren't hiding. They were standing their ground. The Valorians had always believed that strength would win the day, that fear would control any species they encountered, but the humans weren't afraid. "We're not here to destroy you," Lars said, his tone firm. "We're here to study you. We need to know how you fight, how you survive." The human laughed bitterly. "Study us? You think you can just take us apart and learn what makes us tick? That's not how this works." Rachel knelt down to the human's level, studying his face carefully. "Then why fight? You knew we were coming. You knew we were stronger than you." The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over at the trees, his eyes distant. For a moment, it seemed like he was lost in thought, remembering something painful. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. "We fight because we have no choice. Our world has been through wars, and we've seen the worst of what others can do. But we survive. That's what we do. We survive." Rachel was silent for a moment, processing his words. The human's eyes were filled with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. She had never seen anything like it before. It was a kind of resilience that no amount of strength or technology could break. "You should have stayed away," the human added, his voice growing darker. "Now, you've woken something you can't control." Before Rachel could ask what he meant, the human suddenly broke free from the net that had been holding him. With a roar, he pushed past the Valorians, running into the trees. "Stop him!" Lars commanded, but the human was already gone, disappearing into the dense forest. The Valorians quickly regrouped, scanning the area with their weapons drawn. Lars looked at Rachel, his face grim. "What the hell just happened?" Rachel stood still for a moment, thinking. "We underestimated them," she said quietly. "This human, he's not like the others we've faced. They fight differently." Lars nodded, his expression hardening. "We need to find him. He's the key to understanding them." The team moved quickly, following the human's trail. But as they advanced, they realized that they weren't alone. The air was thick with tension, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Then, just as they thought they had lost the trail, they heard something. A loud, high-pitched sound, like the screech of a bird. But it was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It was almost a signal, a call. Rachel stopped. "What was that?" Lars motioned for the team to stay alert. "We'll find out soon enough." As they continued through the forest, they began to notice something strange. The trees were not just trees. They were weapons, large spiked branches that reached out to grab at the Valorians. The ground beneath them was soft, but it shifted in ways that made it harder to move quickly. It was like the forest itself was fighting back. The Valorians pressed on, trying to ignore the creeping unease that filled the air. The human had led them into a trap, but they didn't know what kind of trap it was yet. They only knew that they were far from the safety of their ship, and the deeper they went into the forest, the less certain they became of their own safety. The deeper they went into the forest, the more the Valorians realized that this mission was not going to be as easy as they had thought. The human they had tried to capture had led them into a thick, dense area of the woods, and now the whole team was on edge. Rachel moved quietly, her eyes scanning every corner of the forest. She felt the weight of the situation. They had thought the humans were weak, unprepared for a fight, but now it was clear that this wasn't the case. The human they had captured had been strong, skilled, and ready to die for his home. Lars walked beside her, his expression tight with frustration. "Where did he go?" he muttered under his breath. "He couldn't have gone far." Rachel didn't respond right away. She was still thinking about what the human had said before he ran. "We fight because we have no choice. We survive." There was something in his words that stuck with her. It wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about survival. They heard a noise, a crack of a branch snapping underfoot. The Valorians quickly raised their weapons, but it was too late. A group of humans emerged from the trees, each one carrying primitive weapons. They had no guns, no energy shields, but their eyes were filled with the same fierce determination that the first human had shown. Rachel's heart pounded as the humans surrounded them. They were outnumbered and outmatched in numbers, but not in strength or willpower. "Don't shoot," Rachel ordered, raising her hand. She could see that the humans weren't interested in starting a battle. They were trying to protect their land, but Lars wasn't sure. "Hold your fire!" he barked, his voice sharp. He wasn't happy about the situation, but he was smart enough to know they couldn't afford to escalate things. One of the humans, a tall man with short black hair, stepped forward. He didn't seem afraid, even though he was facing a group of powerful Valorians. He looked straight at Lars. "We don't want to fight," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "But we will if we have to." Lars didn't lower his weapon. "We don't want to fight either," he replied, trying to sound confident. "We are here for information, not war. We mean you no harm." The man didn't seem to believe him. Instead, he motioned to the group of humans behind him. They were tense, their eyes scanning the Valorians for any signs of movement. "We've been through this before," the man said. "Aliens come, say they want peace, and then they take what they want. We won't let that happen again." Rachel stepped forward, trying to break the tension. "We're not like the others," she said quietly. "We don't want to take anything from you. We just need to understand how you survive, how you fight." The man stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. "Understanding how we fight?" he repeated. "You think that's all this is? You think we fight because we want to? We fight because we have no choice. We fight because if we don't, people die." Lars frowned. He didn't understand. "What do you mean? You can't just fight every time someone threatens you. You'll destroy yourselves." The man shook his head, his voice growing more serious. "You don't understand. We've had to fight for everything. Our land, our families, our freedom. If we don't stand up for ourselves, we lose everything. So, we fight. It's the only thing we know." Rachel thought about his words. She had seen this kind of determination before, on other planets, in other species. But there was something different about the humans. They fought not just for survival, but for something more. "We're not trying to take your land," Rachel said again, softer this time. "We just need to know why you fight. What makes you so strong?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and looked at his group of humans, then back at the Valorians. "I'll show you," he said finally. "But it's not going to be easy." Lars exchanged a glance with Rachel. They were reluctant to trust the human, but they had no choice. They needed answers, and this human might be their only chance to get them. "Show us," Lars said, lowering his weapon but keeping it in his hand. The man nodded and motioned for them to follow him. The Valorians moved cautiously, staying in a tight formation as they followed the humans through the forest. They walked for what felt like hours, the silence between them growing heavier with every step. Finally, they arrived at a clearing. It was small, surrounded by trees on all sides. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone structure built into the ground. It looked old, worn, but still standing strong. "This is where we fight," the man said. "This is where we train. We don't have your advanced weapons, but we have something else." The Valorians looked around, confused. What was this place? Why was it so important? The man stepped into the center of the clearing and raised his hands. Slowly, the other humans around him followed suit, stepping into the clearing one by one. They formed a circle, their eyes locked onto the Valorians. "This is where we learn," the man said again, his voice steady. "Where we learn how to survive. This is where we become strong." The humans began to move, performing a series of strange, coordinated movements. It wasn't combat, not in the way the Valorians were used to. There were no weapons involved, but it was clear that these humans were training, not just physically, but mentally as well. Lars and Rachel watched in silence. The movements were slow at first, almost like a dance. But as the humans continued, the pace picked up. Their movements became faster, sharper. They were working together, anticipating each other's moves without speaking. "This is how we fight," the man said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not about strength or weapons. It's about knowing yourself, about understanding your limits and pushing past them." Rachel was starting to understand. This wasn't just physical training, it was mental. The humans were teaching themselves to fight, not just with their bodies, but with their minds. "This is what makes us strong," the man continued. "Not just our bodies, but our will. We never give up. We never stop fighting." Lars looked around at the humans, now moving as one, a perfect unit. They weren't the strongest beings the Valorians had encountered, but they were different. They had something the Valorians didn't, a deep, unshakable determination. "You may have better weapons, better technology," the man said, stepping closer to Lars. "But we have something you'll never take from us, our will to survive." The Valorians stood in silence. They had come here expecting an easy victory, but now they saw the truth. The humans weren't just another species to conquer. They were something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. Lars knew they were facing something that could not be defeated by technology or strength alone. This wasn't going to be easy. But now, more than ever, he knew that the Valorians had underestimated the humans, and it might cost them everything. Lars and Rachel stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the humans practice their strange, fluid movements. The rest of the Valorian team had gathered behind them, waiting for instructions. The air was thick with tension, but Lars couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The humans were strong, not just in body, but in spirit. He could see it in their eyes, their determination. "Captain," Rachel said quietly, her voice tense, "we need to be careful. This isn't just about strength. It's about something deeper. These humans, they fight not just with their bodies, but with everything they are." Lars didn't respond immediately. He had been thinking the same thing. He had never encountered a species like this. He had seen strength before, seen it in warriors across the galaxy, but the humans were different. They fought for something more than survival. They fought for something they could never give up. "We can't let them think they can just stand in our way," Lars finally said, his voice firm. "We have our orders. We need information. If they won't cooperate, we'll take it from them." Rachel turned to look at him, her expression hardening. "Lars, I don't think it's that simple. These people, they don't give up. They fight for each other. They fight for their land, their families. They won't bend to us. Not without a fight." Lars glanced back at the humans. They were still moving, still training, their eyes locked onto one another as if they were preparing for something bigger than just training, something they had been preparing for all their lives. "I know," Lars said, his voice quiet. "But we didn't come all this way to fail." As if on cue, the human leader, the man who had spoken to them before, approached them. His eyes were narrow, focused, but there was no fear in them, only the same resolve that had been there since the first moment they encountered him. "We've given you a chance," the man said, his voice calm but steady. "You came here thinking you could take from us, but we're not like the others you've conquered. We fight to protect what's ours. We fight because we have no other choice." Lars met the man's gaze. "We don't want to take from you," he said, his voice still steady. "We only need to understand you, to learn how you fight, how you survive. We're not here to destroy your way of life, but if you keep resisting, we will do what's necessary." The man didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes unwavering. "Then you leave us no choice. If you want to know how we fight, we'll show you. But know this, we fight to the end. We won't stop. Not for anything." Lars took a step forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. He had always been one to follow orders, but there was something about the way this human spoke that made him hesitate. He had faced countless enemies in his career, but the humans, they were different. "Show us," Lars said, his voice cold but quiet. "Let's see what you've got." The man nodded, and without warning, he stepped back, signaling for the others to move. In an instant, the humans surrounded the Valorians, their movements swift and practiced. The Valorians braced themselves, ready for whatever was coming next. Suddenly, the humans attacked. It wasn't like any battle the Valorians had fought before. There were no blasters, no energy shields, no lasers. Instead, the humans fought with their fists, their legs, their bodies. Their attacks were wild and fast, unpredictable. It wasn't just combat, it was chaos, pure and simple. The Valorians, used to regimented tactics and precise movements, struggled to keep up with the raw, untamed power of the humans. Rachel tried to fight back, using her training to block and counter, but the humans were everywhere, surrounding her, pushing her back. She saw one of her own team members get knocked to the ground by a human with a rock in his hand. The Valorian struggled to get up, but the human pressed the rock against his throat, not killing him, but making it clear that they had no intention of backing down. Lars fired his weapon, but the human leader ducked just in time, rolling out of the way and getting back to his feet in a single, smooth motion. Lars tried to regain control, but it was clear now that they had underestimated the humans. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors in their own right. "Stay together," Lars shouted to his team, trying to rally them, but it was becoming harder to keep his focus. The humans were relentless, each movement sharp and decisive. They didn't waste time, and they didn't hesitate. Rachel, gasping for breath, took a moment to assess the situation. She saw Cody, one of the youngest members of their team, struggling to keep up with the humans. His movements were quick, but he was too inexperienced, too eager to prove himself. A human fighter tackled him to the ground, pinning him there. "Get off him!" Rachel shouted, rushing over to help. But before she could reach them, the human holding Cody flipped him over with one swift motion, throwing him to the side like he was nothing. It was a reminder of how different the humans were. They fought with everything they had, every ounce of energy, every shred of will. Lars stepped forward again, his weapon drawn, but the human leader stood in his way, blocking his path. The two of them faced each other, eye to eye. "You still don't get it, do you?" the human leader said, his voice low. "We won't bend. Not to you, not to anyone. You've underestimated us, and now you'll see just how wrong you were." Lars raised his weapon, but before he could make a move, the human leader's hand shot out, grabbing the weapon and twisting it from his grasp. In one smooth motion, the human threw Lars to the ground, pinning him there with a strength that no Valorian should have been able to match. Lars gasped, struggling to free himself. But the human leader didn't let up. He had Lars trapped, his body weight keeping him firmly in place. "This is how we fight," the man said, his voice calm but fierce. "We don't need your weapons. We don't need your technology. We fight with our hearts, with everything we have, and we will never stop." Lars could feel the pressure on his chest, the weight of the human's body keeping him grounded. For the first time since the mission began, he realized just how wrong they had been. The humans were not weak. They were not an easy target. They were something different, something stronger than they could have imagined. Rachel watched the struggle unfold in front of her, her heart pounding. She had seen enough. The humans were right. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to protect, to fight for what was theirs. And the Valorians were the ones who had come to take. "Stop!" Rachel shouted, raising her hands. "We're not here to fight you. We've made a mistake. Please, we just need to understand." The human leader looked down at Lars for a moment, his grip loosening, but he didn't let go completely. "You don't understand," he said, his voice still steady. "You came here thinking you could control us. But we are not like the others you've conquered. We are stronger than you think." For the first time since they landed on Earth, Lars realized that the humans were not going to back down. They weren't going to give in to the Valorians. They had their own fight, their own strength, and they would not be defeated. Lars nodded, understanding at last. "You're right," he said quietly. "We underestimated you." The human leader finally stepped back, letting Lars rise to his feet. The tension in the air was thick, but there was a shift. It wasn't over yet, but the Valorians were no longer the ones in control. And now, the battle for Earth was just beginning. The battle had stopped. The humans, once a scattered and chaotic force, now stood together, their eyes locked on the Valorians. The tension in the air was thick, and even the Valorians could feel it. This was not the kind of situation they were used to. The humans had shown them that they were not just survivors. They were warriors. Warriors with a strength and resolve that had caught them completely off guard. Lars stood at the edge of the clearing, wiping the sweat from his brow. His body ached, his pride bruised. He had never been in a situation like this before. It wasn't just the battle, it was everything. The humans' spirit, their willingness to fight for what was theirs. It was something Lars had never fully understood until now. Rachel stood beside him, her face serious. She was breathing heavily, but she too had seen something in the humans that had changed everything. They weren't like the other species they had faced. They weren't going to bend. They weren't going to break. They fought with everything they had, and that made them dangerous. The human leader, the man who had faced Lars and pinned him to the ground, approached. He walked slowly, his eyes never leaving the Valorians. There was no fear in him, no hesitation, only calm, steady determination. "You see now," the man said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "We fight because we have no choice, but we also fight because it's what makes us who we are." Lars didn't respond right away. He was still trying to process everything. The fight had been intense, but it wasn't just the physical battle that had left an impact. It was the realization that the humans weren't what they had thought. They were stronger than any enemy Lars had ever faced. "I didn't expect this," Lars admitted, his voice low. "We came here thinking we could control you, but now I see we were wrong." The human leader nodded slowly. "You think you're the first to come here and try to take what's ours? You think you're the first to underestimate us?" Lars glanced at Rachel, then back at the human. "No," he said quietly. "I guess we were just the next in line." The man didn't smile, but there was a glimmer of something in his eyes. "You'll learn," he said. "You'll understand that we don't just fight to survive. We fight to protect everything we've built, our land, our families, our way of life." Rachel stepped forward. "We don't want to destroy your way of life," she said, her voice sincere. "We just needed to understand you. We didn't come to take anything from you. But we see now how wrong we were." The human leader regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without saying a word, he turned and motioned for his people to move. The humans slowly began to disperse, returning to their training, their tasks. They had fought, but they had not fought for victory. They had fought for what mattered to them. The Valorians watched them go, a sense of defeat settling over them. They had not won. They had not even come close. The humans had fought them not with weapons or technology, but with something far more powerful, their will. Lars felt a heavy weight in his chest. He had always believed that strength alone could win any battle, but the humans had proven him wrong. Strength alone was not enough. It never had been. The humans had shown him that the will to protect, to fight for something greater than yourself, could be more powerful than anything else. "We were wrong," Rachel said again, her voice soft. "These humans, they're not just a threat. They're a force. They'll fight to the end, no matter what." Lars nodded slowly, the realization sinking in. "We came here expecting to dominate them, but now we've learned that we have a lot to learn from them." The Valorian fleet, still waiting in orbit above the planet, had been watching from a distance. They had seen the entire encounter unfold, and now they were waiting for orders. Lars knew what the next steps would be, but he also knew that things had changed. "Commander Vros," Lars said, his voice steady, "we need to rethink our approach. The humans aren't like any species we've faced before. We need to understand them, not conquer them." Commander Selena Vros's voice crackled over the communicator. "Understood, Captain. We've been observing. The humans have shown resilience, something we underestimated. But we can't just leave them be. The mission is not over." Lars looked at the sky, watching the massive ships above. He knew the mission wasn't over. But he also knew that the Valorians couldn't just approach the humans as they had before. They had to respect them now. They had to acknowledge that humanity was not a species to be defeated easily. "How many more of us will have to fall before we understand that?" Rachel muttered, her voice tinged with bitterness. Lars didn't answer. He knew the question was rhetorical. The Valorians had always been confident, always certain of their superiority, but that confidence had been shattered on Earth. The humans had made them realize something they had never considered. Victory wasn't just about strength. It was about something more. The humans had won, not because they were stronger, but because they were willing to sacrifice everything for what mattered to them. As Lars and Rachel made their way back to the landing site, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe for the humans. They were a species unlike any other, a species that had fought for everything they had and would never stop fighting to protect it. The Valorians had come to Earth thinking they could take control, but now they had learned a hard truth. The humans didn't need to be controlled. They didn't need to be taught. They already knew what it meant to fight for survival. And they would fight, no matter who came for them next. And so, as the Valorian team returned to their ship, they knew that the mission was not over. But it was no longer about domination. It was about understanding. Understanding the strength of humanity, understanding their will, and understanding that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what you can conquer, but in what you are willing to protect.